An international craze for all things Egyptian followed in the wake of Napoleon's ill-fated invasion of North Africa in 1798. It sparked off a rage for amassing Egyptian tomb treasure that swept through Europe. But within a half-century, scholars were building a scientific framework to study Egyptian art in the context of its native land, and fighting for laws to protect Egyptian monuments from the ravages of treasure hunters. On the eve of the 20th century, archaeology was being transformed from a sport for gentlemen adventurers into a true science. Today, the science of Egyptology continues to uncover new wonders from a culture so rich and diverse that even after centuries of plunder, new finds continue to astonish. Discover how science triumphed over plunder in our quest to unravel the mysteries of ancient Egypt. In 1891, a 17-year-old Englishman arrives in Egypt with no background in ancient languages and a limited knowledge of ancient history. His name is Howard Carter, and he has been hired as an archaeological illustrator to record the magnificent artwork that decorates the walls of tombs excavated by the University of Cairo. Carter's arrival in Egypt coincides with the end of the great age of Victorian Egyptologists. French Egyptologist Gaston Maspereau heads the Department of Egyptian Antiquities, and fellow Englishman William Flinders Petrie is busily unearthing the palace of Akhenaton. It is a time of revolutionary change in archaeology. Gone are the days when Egyptian treasures are carelessly plundered to fill museum exhibition halls. European scholars and Egyptians alike are beginning to treat the ancient monuments with the respect they deserve. After a few months, Carter is sent to the Valley of the Kings to copy the inscriptions in the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. The project turns out to be far larger than Carter ever had imagined. Carter's unsure if he can live up to the new scientific standards, but he's determined to make the best of this rare opportunity. For 6 long years, he copies endless rows of hieroglyphic texts, texts that he does not even know how to read. But Carter's talent, his eye for detail, and uncanny ability to classify at a glance Egyptian art by historical period brings him to the attention of the Director of Egyptian Antiquities, Gaston Maspereau. The meeting is the first of 2 fateful meetings in Carter's life. To ease his crushing workload, Maspereau appoints Carter as Inspector of Antiquities for the southern region of Egypt. His assignment is to scour the province to assess what restoration work might need urgent attention. Carter's territory encompasses thousands of square miles of desert, where he quickly learns that his most important duty is to fight the plague of opportunistic thieves plundering the ancient burial sites. For peasants living in and around the Valley of the Kings, tomb robbing has been one of the few sources of cash since the time of the pharaohs. With the ever-increasing number of treasure hunters and tourists flooding into Egypt in the last quarter of the 19th century, grave robbing has become a major industry. Carter energetically prosecutes both grave robbers and callous tourists who deface the temples and monuments with graffiti. In January 1905, Carter encounters a particularly rowdy group of drunken French tourists. After a series of unpleasantries that lead to a shoving match, Carter has them thrown off site by the police. The French complain to their embassy, who in turn threaten Carter's boss, Maspero. When Howard Carter refuses to apologize to the French embassy for doing his job, Maspero is forced to ask for his resignation. Angry at the loss of one of his best men, Maspero is determined to help Carter get back on his feet. Fortunately, among Maspero's acquaintances is the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Lord Carnarvon is the quintessential late Victorian aristocrat. Fabulously wealthy, he dabbles in everything: race horses, motor cars, art collecting, and most recently, Egyptian archaeology. When Carnarvon asks Maspero to recommend an advisor to help organize an expedition, Maspero eagerly names Howard Carter. Carter and Carnarvon make a good team. They're both enthusiastic and both English. Carter knows Egypt and Carnarvon has money. As the pair plan their expedition, they become close friends. By early 1907, they have secured rights to excavate near Gourna, the notorious village of tomb robbers located on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes. They set up headquarters in nearby Luxor, in a beautiful house called Castle Carter. Finally, Carter can settle down and work as he had always dreamt of doing. He makes this his home for the rest of his life in Egypt. From a scientific standpoint, the Carter-Carnarvon team's work is meticulous, a fact which surprises local scholars and Egyptologists, considering that both of the men are essentially amateurs. The dig at Gourna produces some interesting finds, including several private tombs and a few royal monuments. But Carter and Carnarvon have their hearts set on digging in the Valley of the Kings, a site currently licensed to the American Theodore Davis. On more than one occasion, Davis had unearthed embalming vessels used in Tutankhamun's burial, but somehow never connected the items with the existence of the fabled tomb itself. When Davis retires in 1914, it is with a firm pronouncement, "There's nothing left to be found in the Valley of the Kings." Suspecting Davis's mistake, Carnarvon and Carter snap up the excavation rights. Just as the team opens the first pit, the First World War breaks out. Lord Carnarvon is forced to return to England, and Carter's work is severely restricted by a lack of manpower and the Egyptian government's wartime policy. It is not until 3 years later, in 1917, that Carter can resume proper excavations. Constantly in correspondence with Lord Carnarvon, the pair decide to concentrate their efforts on locating the tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun. For decades, Egyptologists have believed the tomb was somewhere in the valley, but no one could find it in the swirling ocean of sand. With no reliable leads, Carter has no choice but to crisscross the entire valley with a series of trenches. It is an immense operation. Over the next 5 years, hundreds of workers moved tens of thousands of tons of debris without the slightest hint of Tutankhamun's tomb. At the end of the 5th year, Lord Carnarvon is as frustrated as Carter. The project has cost a fortune and yielded nothing. Only through Carter's pleas does Carnarvon agree to 1 more year, but no more. The 1922-23 season must produce results or the project ends. November 4, 1922. Only 3 days after Carter returns to work, his workmen uncover what appears to be a stairway hiding the entrance to the tomb of Ramses VI. Within half an hour, enough sand is removed to reveal a sealed doorway. Carter frantically telegrams Lord Carnarvon.
Have made extraordinary discovery in the valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Have made secure pending your arrival. Congratulations.
20 days later, Carnarvon arrives in Luxor, and the men rush to the tomb like a pair of excited children. As the rubble is cleared away, an inner door is revealed.
Without difficulty, we could make out several seals bearing the name of Tutankhamun.
Carter chips open a small hole and holds a flickering candle to the opening.
At first, I could see nothing. But as I got used to the light, strange shapes began to loom out of the darkness. Animals and statues, and everywhere the gleam of gold. For a few seconds, I remained stunned. When Lord Carnarvon finally asked, "Do you see anything?" I could only reply, "Yes, wonderful things."
It does not take Carter and Carnarvon long to realize the enormity of their discovery.
This was no ordinary find that could be sorted out in one season. There was simply no precedent to show us how to proceed. The thing went beyond all experience. It seemed there was more to be done than any human action could accomplish.
Carter realizes that he'll have to assemble a team of specialists representing every field of archaeology in order to record, analyze and preserve the vast contents of the tomb. A dozen experts answer the urgent call for help. Archaeologists, architectural historians, illustrators and restoration experts come to join the team. Among them is photographer Harry Burton, who will record the work with more than 3,000 photographs. The anterooms and burial chamber are in chaos. Intruders over the centuries have thrown the delicate artifacts everywhere in their frenzied search for gold and jewels. The confusion only complicates the monumental job of sorting, classifying and numbering the more than 2,000 objects thrown together in careless piles. As each piece is catalogued, its exact location must be recorded on a floor plan. In all, there are 4 rooms: the antechamber, the annex, the mortuary chamber, and the treasury, each one jammed full of Tutankhamun's treasure.
through one room at a time. Each object was placed upon a padded stretcher and secured tightly. When we had sufficient number, we allowed them to leave under heavy escort for the laboratory. It took 7 weeks to empty the antechamber alone.
Nearby, an abandoned tomb is hurriedly converted into a laboratory. Here, each object is carefully cleaned, measured, photographed, and where necessary, restored. Tragically, only 4.5 months after the tomb is opened, Lord Carnarvon dies of an infected mosquito bite. Carnarvon's death, along with the sudden death of several workers and visitors, causes the media to invent the curse of King Tut's tomb, a fantasy that fires public imagination and makes the find seem all the more spectacular and mysterious. A new era of Egyptian pop culture has begun, and tourists from Europe and America flood in. Not since Napoleon Bonaparte's publication of the Description of Egypt, over 100 years earlier, has there been such excitement over ancient Egypt, and this time it is being driven by the mass media of newspapers and newsreels. As the media circus swirls around him, Howard Carter is left alone to complete the most monumental project in the history of Egyptian archaeology. It is another 2.5 years before Howard Carter comes face to face with the boy king, who has become the driving force behind his life's work. Late in 1925, the team finally reaches the royal sarcophagus. Carter has waited 11 years for this moment. Tutankhamun, more than 3,500 years. When the moment comes to raise the 1,300-pound lid on the royal coffin, Carter is overcome with emotion.
We knew we were the first to lay our hands on these objects, since the Child King had been placed here over 3,000 years before.
The sarcophagus itself is nested inside 4 gold-encrusted shrines, each covered with scenes from the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. The innermost case, the sarcophagus which holds the body of the young king, is cast from more than 250 pounds of pure gold.
It was at that moment that the real importance and beauty of our discovery finally hit us. Before our very eyes shone a fabulous mass of sculptured gold, a priceless specimen of ancient art. It had such a sad, calm expression.
But little else is calm at the dig. A rising tide of Egyptian nationalism is causing political problems for Carter, the English colonial government, and all foreigners working in Egypt. At one point, Egyptian police prevent Carter from entering the tomb. Despite sensationalism and political problems, Carter persists in his work. Although Carter spends the rest of his life preparing reports and writing books on his amazing find, when he dies at the age of 65 in 1939, his work remains unfinished. It is not that Carter was not up to the task. Archaeology in general, and Egyptology in specific, had become so complicated that in the future all major work would have to be carried out by teams of experts. 1.5 centuries of work in Egypt has put Egyptology at the forefront of archaeological study throughout the world. But notable in their absence throughout this time are the Americans. With few exceptions, American scholars are culturally isolationist and religiously fundamentalist. They see ancient Egypt as a world of pagan depravity, a land of idolaters who held the Hebrew people in slavery. One of the first Americans to gain an international reputation for his work in Egyptology is George Reisner. Trained in ancient Semitic languages and Near Eastern civilizations at Harvard University, Reisner writes a number of papers which brings him to the attention of the international community of Egyptologists. In 1897, Gaston Maspero seeks to hire George Reisner to help date and classify the growing mountain of artifacts gathering dust at the Cairo Museum. He, however, still needs to find the necessary funding. Enter Phoebe Hurst, a rich patroness of the arts who agrees to finance an archaeological expedition to Egypt. As the 19th century draws to a close, George Reisner leaves America for an adventure of a lifetime. Aged 32, he arrives in Cairo, eager to learn all he can. Reisner finds he's looked on as a rustic curiosity from the land of cowboys and Indians. Determined to prove himself, he's anxious to get beyond the confines of the Cairo Museum. Thanks to his connections with Gaston Maspero, he's granted a concession to excavate in southern Egypt, just north of Luxor. Anxious to show the Americans as the scientific and cultural equal of their European counterparts, Reisner pushes himself and his workers mercilessly. Over the next 5 years, no one on Reisner's team is allowed to take a single day off work. The grueling pace produces numerous finds of scientific importance. But because they are primarily from the earliest period of Egyptian history, the same period Maspero had pioneered, they do not provide the array of treasure found in later period tombs, and lack the media impact of more spectacular finds. But all that hard work has paid off. By 1905, Harvard University and the Museum of Boston jointly offer him substantially increased funding. Like every visitor to Egypt since Napoleon, Reisner is fascinated by the pyramids at Giza. They seem to embody the awe and mystery of ancient Egypt. This is where Reisner wants to continue his work. As luck has it, Gaston Maspero and the Department of Egyptian Antiquities are about to let out concessions to dig near the pyramids. Italy, Germany and the US are all to receive digging rights. Maspero calls together representatives of the 3 countries. Standing in for the US is George Reisner.
Each country wanted a part of this great cemetery. The place was to be divided into 3. The Italians got the south, the Germans the central part, and I got the north.
To assist him, he calls in a modest team of experts in various disciplines and a small army of workmen. Reisner insists that his men use the most modern and precise research methods available. Of the many tombs Reisner has under excavation, the most impressive is that of Queen Mirashak, granddaughter of Pharaoh Cheops, builder of the earliest and largest of the Great Pyramids. The paintings on the walls celebrate the beauty of the Queen and bring to life the splendor of her court. In the Great Chapel, Reisner finds a strange parade of female figures, each one an identical image of the Queen herself. Only 2 years later, while excavating the Temple of Mykerinos, he discovers 4 groups of magnificent statues. One group shows the Pharaoh Mykerinos and his queen. Another depicts Mykerinos standing between the goddess Hathor and a female figure symbolizing southern Egypt. Reisner adores each new find almost as though it was alive. Describing the statues from the Mykerinos temple, he writes,
"It was most satisfying to be able to add this piece to the collection of family photos.
Reisner has become respected for his discoveries, but it's his devotion to work, unfailing good humor, and discipline that endears him to his colleagues. No longer the curious American cowboy, by 1911, George Reisner has become one of the most respected Egyptologists of his day. As Reisner's reputation grows, so does the stream of visitors to his camp. Gaston Maspero visits, as do Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon during the rare breaks from their own excavations. And there are the inevitable visits from his patrons from Harvard. By 1914, Reisner's colleagues and patrons show their appreciation for his work in a tangible way. He's simultaneously appointed Professor of Egyptian Archaeology at Harvard University and Curator of the Egyptian Collection at the Boston Museum of Arts. With additional backing at his disposal, Reisner decides to follow a line of inquiry in Nubia, begun almost 70 years earlier by German explorer Karl Lepsius. Could the roots of pharaonic Egypt lie in Black Africa? At Kerma, in what was once the kingdom of Nubia, they excavate hundreds of circular tomb burials. The connections between African, Egyptian and Mediterranean cultures quickly become evident. Art and pottery found in Kerma burials show both Egyptian and African influences. Reisner theorizes that Kerma was once the hub of trade between Egypt and the rest of Africa. Tribal Africa and pharaonic Egypt did not exist in isolation. They coexisted and traded with each other. Fully aware that such news would cause a firestorm of controversy, particularly in racially divided America, Reisner is still anxious to publish his discovery. Ironically, Reisner completes his excavations and releases his findings late in 1923. Exactly the same time that Carter and Carnarvon's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb makes worldwide headlines. Undaunted by the Egypt-Africa connection, being overshadowed by Tutmania, Reisner continues his work. Largely due to Reisner's successes, more and more American museums and universities begin to fund Egyptian expeditions. Despite the worldwide depression, an increasing number of Americans set up excavations during the 1930s. Each is trying to outdo the other and their European counterparts, who have more than a century's head start. The men leading these expeditions are committed scientists, many of whom go on to play an important role in the development of Egyptology, and are responsible for a number of intriguing discoveries. One is Herbert Winlock, who directs excavations financed by the Metropolitan Museum of New York. He decides to re-explore a tomb hollowed into the rock above the temple at Deir el-Bahri. After several weeks of excavation, Winlock reaches a break in the rock. Before him, an unbelievable sight: a chest of abandoned toys. Figurines in wood, exquisitely carved, once the possessions of Meketre, Chancellor to the King. These tiny models reflect the happy moments the deceased wanted to relive in the afterlife. Reisner presses on, as full of enthusiasm as when he first arrived in Egypt 4 decades earlier. When Nazi Germany invades Egypt in 1940, the 75-year-old Reisner refuses to abandon his work. Nearly blind, Reisner continues dictating his notes, stubbornly ignoring the war raging across the desert. In 1942, as the English army drive the Germans out of Egypt, George Reisner dies only days after completing his last book. But there are others already carrying on Reisner's work. Foremost among them is Pierre Montet, the first major figure in Egyptology to begin his work in the 20th century. Montet's digs are always something special. They're as original, spontaneous, and as unconventional as the man himself. Some of his earliest discoveries concerning Egypt's past are made in the 1920s. Not in Egypt, however, but at Byblos in Lebanon, long believed to be the oldest continually inhabited town in the world. The port at Byblos has long been suspected of having trading links with Egypt. The Bible even records that it is from Lebanon that Egypt acquires cedar trees for construction work. Montet is convinced he can find evidence to support this. Intuitively, he begins to excavate the tombs of the kings of Byblos. Here he finds artifacts displaying Egyptian motifs and designs, proving a cultural connection between the two countries. Amazingly, there are also hieroglyphs at Byblos, but these are older, more primitive than those from Egypt. Was it possible that the people of Byblos had taught the Egyptians to read and write? To continue his search for links between Egypt and her Mediterranean neighbors, Montet moves his operation to Tanis in the Nile Delta. Piecing together the links of various ancient civilizations will be difficult and time-consuming, but Montet is committed to the work.
For me, the excavations at Tanis would confirm those at Byblos. Instead of trying to find Egyptian traces in Lebanon, it might be better to look for them in Egypt.
In connections with Byblos, Monte is convinced that Tanis holds the proof that ancient Jews had been in Egypt 17 centuries before Christ. His goal is no less than proving the presence of the ancient Hebrews in Egypt at the time of their captivity, as recounted in the Old Testament book of Exodus. The team laboriously start clearing the ruins of the Great Temple and the Temple of Anta, and slowly Monte's hunch begins to pay off. The first crucial link in connecting the ancient Jews to Egypt is the evidence that Tanis had been the capital of Ramses II, long believed to have been pharaoh at the time of the Exodus. Over the next 10 years, the name and face of Ramses II appears everywhere at Tanis. On obelisks, statues, columns and stelae. There's a wealth of information, and Monte is determined to uncover every bit of it. Throughout the 1930s, the work at Tanis continues, each season bringing a new discovery. Eventually the team uncover the tombs of nearly all the kings from the 21st and 22nd dynasties. In February 1939, they make the most important find.
We are all very excited. We had collected some remains of Shapti figures and a gold buckle. And then, at 2 o'clock, I cleared away the earth and stones that blocked the entrance to a square room.
Disregarding the tons of earth still piled on top of the tomb, Monte squeezes into the dark hole.
There were 2 chambers decorated with beautiful hieroglyphics, funerary images, and a wonderful sarcophagus. The tomb does not, in my opinion, belong exclusively to one person. There are surely more funerary chambers a little further to the north, and we plan to go there next week.
On the 17th of March, the team make another remarkable discovery.
Our joy is indescribable. The pharaoh Psusenna's tomb, intact. No one had entered this tomb since the burial of the king. There are magnificent bas-reliefs in the chamber. The mummy lies in a gold sarcophagus, within a silver one, bearing a falcon's head.
3 days after the tomb is opened, Farouk, the king of Egypt, visits the dig, with a film crew in tow.
The king came incognito, but from 8 o'clock everyone knew he had arrived, and all the village was waiting. The king was enthralled, and now Movietone News is going to show Tanis on the screen.
The next day, King Farouk accompanies Monte and the team into the tomb for the opening of the royal sarcophagus. When the lid is lifted, the company is astounded to find that the mummy inside is not that of King Psusennes. It is Pharaoh Shoshenq. An amazing find, but one leading to the inevitable question, where is Psusennes? The question would have to remain unanswered until the next year's excavations. When the team reassembles the following year, it is January 1940, and the army of Nazi Germany is pushing its way through the Mideast towards Egypt. A sense of urgency hangs over the camp. Working frantically, Monte notices that a wall in the antechamber conceals 2 hidden doors. Dismantling one of them, he peers through a crack in a granite slab.
The crack was very narrow, but from the gleam coming from the interior, I was certain I would find more things than I had ever done in my entire life.
Here, at last, is the tomb of the elusive Pseucelis. Here too is a connection that Montet has been looking for over 12 years.
The most wonderful thing was the image of the goddess Nut, her body stretched out, giving the dead king the kiss of eternal life. Quite incredible.
The tomb yields a treasure trove of information. Many of the jewels, bracelets, gold rings and amulets show clear evidence of Syrian influence. Here at last is proof that Egypt has traded with other Mediterranean cultures. Pierre Montet continues to dig at Tanis until 1951. Although he never finds conclusive proof of Hebrew presence in Egypt, his work extends our knowledge of Egypt's broader influence in the ancient world. In 1952, less than a year after Montet retires, the British-backed monarchy of King Farouk collapses, and Egypt is declared a republic. After more than a century of colonial rule, Egypt becomes responsible for her own destiny and that of her priceless heritage. But just a decade later, some of Egypt's most spectacular monuments come again under threat. This time, it is in the name of economic progress.
The explosion of peace has been heard throughout Africa and the rest of the planet.
Built to provide increased agricultural output and electricity for the new country, the Aswan High Dam threatens to wipe out scores of priceless monuments, temples and sanctuaries under the rising waters of Lake Nasser.
noon, the 16th of May 1964. This is the birth of the 8th wonder of the world.
It takes 20 years, from 1960 to 1980, to carry out the greatest salvage operation of all time. In total, 22 monuments are moved away from the rising waters, most being rebuilt on the shores of Lake Nasser. One of the most important operations concerns Philae, a temple which until the 6th century AD was the center of the cult of Isis. The salvage operation lasts 8 years. A wall of steel plates is built up around the island, and the water inside siphoned off. Cut up into some 40,000 blocks, the walls of the temples are first cleaned, then measured by photogrammetry, so that all the pieces of the puzzle can be refitted together to the nearest millimeter. The neighboring island of Aglika is then thoroughly leveled and new foundations laid before Philae can be resurrected using all the skills of modern technology. One of the most formidable challenges of the salvage operation is the removal of the great rock temples of Abu Simbel, some of the most spectacular monuments of the ancient world. These statues of crumbling sandstone had to be dismantled with surgical precision and carefully moved to the new site some 60 meters higher. This gigantic task consists of cutting up 1,000 blocks and moving some 300,000 tons of rock. Ramses II always dreamt of becoming immortal. After some 3,000 years, it looks as though his wish may come true. 1863, Egyptologist Auguste Mariette said,
"Once upon a time, Egypt destroyed her monuments. Today, she respects them, and in the future, she will love them."
Fortunately for the world, modern Egypt has lived up to his prophecy. Of the dozens of archaeological teams and hundreds of individuals working in the field of Egyptology today, many are native Egyptians. The General Director of Archaeological Sites at Giza and Saqqara is Dr. Zahi Hawass. Hawass is a tireless promoter of Egypt and has done more to keep his country's past in the public eye than anyone since Howard Carter. Like William Flinders Petrie, nearly a century ago, Hawass believes that the lives of the common people of ancient Egypt are as important to our understanding of the lost culture of the pharaohs as the glittering treasures gleaned from royal tombs.
Come by with me and see this most impressive tomb. Look to the love and the affection between a man and a woman loved each other since 4,600 years ago. What you really have at Giza are only tombs of kings, queens, and nobles and officials. Those represent only 20% of the whole population of Egypt. But the 80% are the farmers, the workmen. Then who are those people who built the pyramids? Who are their parents? Then that was really the important thing about my research, that I was looking to another type of people that no one really looked for it at all. People such as Mariette and Maspero, they really protected the Egyptian monuments. I really say all the time, I consider them as a real Egyptians, because they thought that the Egyptian monuments, it's their heritage, which we are Egyptian now, saying that the Egyptian monuments does not belong to us as Egyptians, but belongs to everyone.
Fortunately, there are many who agree with Zahi Hawass. Among them is Mohammed El-Sagir, Chief Inspector of Antiquities in southern Egypt, a position once held by Howard Carter. El-Sagir has been reconstructing the royal path connecting the necropolis at Karnak with the tombs at Luxor.
It was not sure that the avenue links the two temples of Karnak and Luxor. But after working here and in the middle of the city and in the northern part, now became sure that the avenue links the two temples. Total length of the avenue is 2 kilometers and 400 meters. In this case, the approximately numbers of the avenues about 4,000 statues between Karnak and Luxor. And of course, in our plan, we started, as I said, in 1984, and we shall not stop until we clear and cover the whole avenue, the whole processional way. And we started now to dig in the middle of the city itself, in the north, after the city, and within 5 or 6 years we shall complete the work.
Apart from developing modern scientific methods, do today's Egyptologists have a new sense of purpose? Or do they still long for the fame and fortune that brought their 19th century predecessors to the shifting sands of the Sahara?
I don't look for that, but I have to do something for my country, for the field of the archaeology. This was a dream for many years now for the Egyptologists to discover this way. I shall do it myself because this is my dream.
Despite centuries of neglect and plunder, much of it carried out at the hands of men who firmly believed they were doing the right thing, Egypt and the science of Egyptology have both survived to contribute tremendously to the world's knowledge of one of mankind's earliest great civilizations. The time is long gone when only adventurers came to Egypt to acquire artifacts for museums and private collections. Although the methods were sometimes crude, it would be a mistake to judge them from the comfortable perspective of our 21st century morality. Without their work and their effort, we would not have come as far in our understanding of this ancient culture as we have in only 2 centuries. Sir Isaac Newton once said, "If I've seen further than others, it is only by standing on the shoulders of giants." The pioneers of Egyptology were each giants in their own right. Without their tireless efforts, today's Egyptologists would be hard-pressed to know where to begin the quest for ancient Egypt.